Let me know when we're live, Andrea. We're live? All right, wonderful. So good afternoon and welcome to bill hearings for the House Health and Government Operations and Judiciary Committees. Today we have the pleasure and blessing of working together to hear this bill. So Chair Clippinger and I welcome you, and I'm going to go through some of the rules that he and I developed. First, we kindly ask for your patience if we encounter any technical or streaming issues. Today we're going to hear from the bill sponsor, the sponsor panel, and then virtual witnesses. If there are a large number of witnesses, we will alternate panels between favorable and unfavorable, just to give everyone a fair chance of being heard. The bill sponsor testimony is not limited, while all witnesses have 2 minutes to provide testimony. A timer is displayed on the screen and at the witness panel, and a sound will play when your time has expired. We do not want to be rude, so please, when you hear it, just wrap it up. Please, to our committees, adhere to, basically your best question, and please keep your questions brief. Members of the public will be able to view the live stream of this hearing on the Maryland General Assembly website and on the YouTube channel as well. Now I'm going to call on behalf of Chair Clippinger and I, House Bill 1328, which is sponsored by Delegate Hill. It is titled End of Life Option, the Honorable Elijah E. Cummings and the Honorable Shane E. Pendergrass Act. Delegate Hill, good afternoon. How are you?
I'm well. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and Mr. Chair and Madams Vice Chairs, both committees and committee members. For the record, I'm Terry Hill, presenting House Bill 1328, the End of Life Option Act, also known as the Honorable Elijah E. Cummings and Honorable Shane E. Pendergrass Act. As a doctor, legislator, and daughter, a caregiver, and supporter of friends and family members as they have fought to live and as they have died, I want to be clear that I highly value life, and I highly value life with dignity and the dignity of death. My support of and respect for all adult patients' right, given adequate capacity, to exercise personal control over their healthcare decisions throughout life does not end because the choices are limited. Like the overwhelming number of my constituents, I believe that this bill provides compassion and autonomy to those facing imminent death. It encourages honest discussion between the patient and their loved ones about the fears, hopes, wishes, and regrets that often accompany the understanding that death is indeed pending, and shortly so. Terminal diagnoses come with a raft of unanticipated and difficult to navigate personal and practical challenges. And this can be compounded by an evolving medical decision landscape regarding treatment and care, support, transitions, and other things that go along with the changes, and that change as the progression of the disease continues on. The more serious the condition becomes, the closer death becomes, often the more challenging the decisions. In consideration, discussions about the options take on a whole different tone and urgency when death is looming as a reality rather than an abstraction. I suspect for those of us on, at this hearing, this is mostly an abstraction discussion. But for many of the witnesses who you will hear from this afternoon, it is a very real reality. And in fact, we have some witnesses that have appeared before us in years past who are not able to be here this year because they are now facing death and are not well enough to be here. And they have asked us over and over to give them the option, when they made it to this point, to choose how they go out in a dignified fashion with a sense of surety that they could do it with family around in a way that was suitable to them. And we've decided, because of our failure to pass this legislation, that it was more important to us that they end their life in a way that we as a body, we as a state thought they should. We took that individual decision out of their hands. So each of us may think we know how we would respond if granted the knowledge that our final days were upon us, but none of us will truly know how we will face it until we actually do. So what I'd like to do is just really briefly go through what this bill does, not in detail, but just explaining what it does, so that in this afternoon discussion, particularly for those who are hearing it for the first time, I can make sure that we're all on the same page. So I'm reading now from the actual text of the bill. Aid in dying means the medical practice of a physician prescribing medication to a qualified individual that the qualified individual may self-administer to bring about the qualified individual's death. To be qualified, the person must have the capacity to make medical decisions. And by capacity, the bill defines they must be able to understand the nature and consequences of healthcare decisions. They must be able to understand the significant benefits, risk, and alternatives of any healthcare decision that they make. And they must be able to make and communicate an informed decision to healthcare providers, including communication through whatever means they are normally able to communicate. An individual under this bill would be able to make a request for aid in dying by first making an initial oral request to their physician. 2, after making the initial oral request, the individual must make a second oral request to the attending or the individual's attending physician that is at least 15 days after they make the initial oral request. So they have to wait 2 weeks, have some time to think about it, and then say, yes, I would like to have this assistance and I think I qualify. And that second oral request has to be at least 48 hours after making the written request. And they must make a written request, as I said, as well as the oral request. Now, at least one of the oral requests must be made when the individual making the request is alone with the physician. And I will say that in my journey with this bill, having served on a work group to help improve the protections in my first session of supporting this bill, this is one of the protections that we put in Maryland that was not in the legislation in other states. And it's one that I think goes a long way in ensuring that there is no coercion of the individual to make this decision. The written request must be signed and dated by the individual and witnessed by 2 other individuals. And only one of the witnesses may be a relative, and none of the witnesses may be the attending physician. The bill then goes on to say that when the physician is presented with the individual's written request, the attending must determine that the individual whether or not the individual is a qualified individual who has made an informed decision and voluntarily requested aid in dying. An individual is not considered qualified if that qualification is solely due to their age, disability, or a specific illness. Once the physician has determined that the person is qualified, they then must refer them to a consulting physician who must examine the individual and the relevant medical records to determine and confirm that the diagnosis and the diagnosis and prognosis of it being a terminal illness are correct. And if there is any question about the person being qualified from a mental capacity standpoint, they and also the original physician are required to refer them for a mental health assessment. If either of the two physicians, the initial physician or the consulting physician, refer them to a mental health professional, which they're required to do if they're concerned that there is any impaired judgment, then they may not move forward until they receive a written confirmation from the mental health professional, and it's a licensed mental health professional, that the person is indeed competent and qualified to make the decision. Once that confirmation is confirmed, in the case that a mental health consultation is required, or once the two physicians concur in the diagnosis, the prognosis, and the sincerity with which the qualified individual has made the request, then the physician must notify the patient additionally of certain information having to do with the risk and the recommendation that they let people who are close to them know about their decision, and that they are informed that the request can be withdrawn at any time and in any manner, so that it is clear to the individual that even though they've put the request in writing and their request has been granted, they are not required to continue down that road, nor are they required, once the medication has been prescribed, dispensed, and received, to take it, that they retain the autonomy throughout the rest of their lives. So then the prescribing physician must reconfirm that the patient indeed wants the medication and is still competent to make that decision. The prescription is written, the medication is dispensed under, again, more restrictions, and the patient then has the opportunity to have the medication with them and to take it or not take it. And you'll hear some testimony later on about how we've seen this work in other states and jurisdictions where this is legal. And you'll hear testimony about how many people never go on to take the medication. And it has seemed to me, when I've spoken to patients and spoken to people who have asked for this and looked at the data, that the reason many people who ask for the medication never take it is because having the medication available gives them a sense of peace in the knowledge that maybe they can go just this one more day. But if it gets too bad and too difficult, too painful, whether we're talking physical pain, emotional pain, but it gets too difficult that they don't have to go on if they don't want to. And that autonomy can make all the difference in finding peace in those final days. So let me now just list some of the opposition that you'll be hearing, and it falls into a few categories. One is that physicians can't actually predict with any certainty how long someone will be before they die. That is absolutely true. And because this legislation does not require that a patient who is facing imminent death do anything, they don't have to choose the option. And if they choose the option, they don't have to follow through with it. It doesn't matter whether the doctor's predictions are on point or not. Patients and people who are dying tend to know when they are dying, even when people have told them that they're not. So that is not relevant because this is, it's not a mandate, it's an option. Secondly, you may hear that this is immoral. And my answer to that is that morality, when it comes to life and death on a personal journey, is really between a person and their God, if they have a God. And I would not want someone to judge that for me, and I don't think you would want someone to judge that for you. The third is that these are lethal drugs, and they might get into the wrong hands. The bill has provisions for how medication that is not taken should be discarded. And I will say, having gone to more than a few drug take-back programs, that if you saw the kinds of potentially lethal medications that people have in their medicine cabinets because of illnesses that are much more significant than the prescription that's given in this case, you will see that the provisions in this bill are much more protective of what happens with those medications in this bill than they are with potentially lethal medications generally. The next argument is that this is a slippery slope. And I would say that there's no slipping on the slope unless the legislative body chooses to act. We have 20 odd years of experience in other states. This bill has not been a slippery slope in any way. And the fifth is that it encourages suicidality. And again, I think primarily as a professional in the healthcare field, I just have looked at the data and I just don't find that to be true. So I would also note that the ARC and other groups have offered testimony in which they are recommending some amendments. As a sponsor, I remain open to all those suggestions and to any suggested amendments that will increase protections without compromising the autonomy and self-determination that this bill is meant to give people. I would also note that in their testimony, they say over the years, the ARC Maryland has historically come in opposition following the national chapter. But over time, with heightened recognition of the importance of preserving individual body autonomy, I'm now quoting, our Maryland membership has divided views on the matter. While some of our members oppose this legislation, some would like to see a form of this legislation pass, but they ask that it be passed only with the amendments. And as I said, that is a conversation that we are very open to having. So I want to end my testimony today by again pointing out that the protections in this bill are stronger than protections under many other end-of-life bills that have passed in other legislatures in other states. But it's also stronger than current law on two areas where physician actions may facilitate a more rapid patient death. One is palliative sedation, and the other is withdrawal of fluids and nutrition. And let me just leave you with these words from either poet Lawrence F. Beecher or Henry Van Dyke. I am standing upon the seashore. A ship at my side spreads her white sails to the moving breeze and starts for the blue ocean. She is an object of beauty and strength. I stand and watch her until, at length, she hangs like a speck of white cloud just where the sea and sky come to mingle with each other. Then someone at my side says, "There, she is gone." Gone? Where? Gone from my sight. That is all. She is just as large in mast, hull, and spar as she was when she left my side. And she is just as able to bear her load of living freight to her destined port. Her diminished size is in me, not in her. And just at the moment when someone says, "There, she is gone," there are other eyes watching her coming and other voices ready to take up the glad shout, "Here she comes." And that is dying. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Hill, for your testimony and your leadership on this issue. I'm going to call your panel and then I will open it up for questions, okay? The first panel, and I'm going to alternate between favorable and unfavorable. We're doing a favorable panel. Now, we have former Chair of the Health and Government Operations Committee, Shane Pendergrass. Good afternoon, Chair Pendergrass. How are you? Can you unmute yourself?
There I am.
Wonderful. Great to see you.
You too. You can see me chewing.
Yes.
I apologize. It's a pleasure to be here today. I am reading Elijah Cummings' testimony from when I was in the body, because I think his words are more eloquent than anything I could ever say. So I will read to you, and you do have a copy of this. Dear colleagues and friends, I've informed you that you would welcome my thought. I've been informed that you'd welcome my thoughts regarding the End of Life Option Act proposed for enactment by the 2019 Maryland General Assembly. Despite my general reluctance to interject my personal views into decisions that, under our federal system, are properly within your discretion, I've decided to respond. I do so in part because, like many of you, I have reached a time in my own life when I have experienced the loss of far too many people whom I admired and loved. Some who suffered for months knowing that they were about to die. As I recall these losses for you, I must acknowledge that my prayer for those dying loved ones deprived of any reasonable hope for a prolonged life was for a respectful and compassionate ending to their suffering, and a swift journey to that better place that is promised to all people of faith. I say this to you in full knowledge that there are those among us whose conscience can never accept that any person should have the right to choose the manner and time of their passing, even when facing death in the very near term. My reading of the proposed legislation is that it would respect and extensively protect those determinations of conscience, both for the terminally ill person and for all others who may be involved. It seems to me, however, that the critical issue addressed by the End of Life Option Act is different, both morally and constitutionally. It is the question of who has the right to choose. The act would recognize that the constitutional right to privacy in Maryland excludes the right of the terminally ill human being, legally competent, fully informed, and protected from coercion, to choose the manner and time of their passing. It would recognize and declare that at the end of life, an individual's right to self-determination about one of the most personal decisions that anyone could make supersedes the moral sensibilities of others. As a just and compassionate society, we cannot value life in the abstract and deny to those who are about to die the self-determination they deserve. For these reasons, I recommend and support those who would enact this reform in our laws, and at your discretion, I would welcome the inclusion of these comments in the record of your proceedings. Respectfully, Elijah Cummings, who, as you all know, is a friend of many of us and a former colleague. Thank you.
And thank you for your leadership regarding this issue and many others. It's great to see you. I'm going to go on to the next panelist, which will be Lynn Cave, followed by Jane Bird, Dr. Jane Bird. Will you please unmute yourself, Ms. Cave?
Yes, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I'm Lynn Cave, and before I start my testimony, I'd just like to say I'm feeling a little wobbly today because I had scans last week that may change the projection of my life. I'll find out whether my tumor has progressed or not. So I learned a different term besides cancer. I learned that there's scanxiety, and I have that right now. So
You could take your time, and I want to say on behalf of both committees, we're really sorry that you're not feeling well, and we pray that you recover fully, okay?
thank you. Thank you so
You're
much.
welcome.
When I first heard of medical aid in dying as an option years ago, when I was a healthy 20-something, I thought, why should people who are facing imminent death have to suffer for any prolonged time? I was all for it. It made perfect sense. Now I'm a 60-something in poor health, and having the possibility of the end of life option, that's Option Act, could play a pivotal role as I face a cancer that will claim my life. I don't want my disease to choose when I die. I want to make that decision for myself when pain and suffering are all I have left. Here's my story. I worked at the National Institutes of Health for 38 years, mainly in public affairs and where I wrote press releases and pamphlets. But I also spent a few years in the part of the National Cancer Institute that ran clinical trials. Ironically, I'm now in a clinical trial to stabilize my metastatic eye cancer. My cancer has spread to my liver. It will never be cured. Before I started the trial, they told me I had about 2 years to live. Well, I'm ecstatic to report that the medicines I take for the trial have allowed me to live for 2.5 years so far, and I hope for many more. But even with the current treatments, few with my disease make it beyond 5 years. Eventually, the cancer will choke out my normal liver cells, which normally would cleanse toxins from my body. I expect there will be terrible pain. And once this cancer destroys my liver, I will have about 2 weeks before all my internal systems shut down and I pass away. Would you want to wait 2 weeks knowing you're going to die? Does pain ever enhance life? I don't want to perpetuate my own suffering for 2 long weeks, nor do I want my family to endure the agony caused by days and days of watching me die little by little. Believe me, I'm doing everything I can to live. I want to live. I go up monthly to Philadelphia, where some cancer specialists in this field work to tame this cancer. And if this clinical trial stops working, there are some limited options. But if it gets to the point that I will suffer and die, no matter what I do, no matter what my doctors do, I don't want to extend my life. I hope you can make the End of Life Option Act an option for me. It would be such a kindness for the Maryland legislature to pass this act. Some of us will thank you sooner, some later, but many of us with deadly illnesses will be glad for the opportunity to choose the time we die. Having the promise of a dignified death on my own terms is my greatest comfort for what lies ahead. So I plead with you to follow the compassionate will of the governor and the people of Maryland, over 70% of whom support this bill, to make this end of life option bill a reality for all Marylanders now. So perhaps you, and so I don't have to suffer needlessly when a prolonged.
And thank you, Ms. Kay, for sharing your personal story with us. I want you to know that both committee appreciate it. We do not take it for granted, okay? It takes a lot to open yourself up and make yourself vulnerable. So thank you so much, and our prayers are with you. We're gonna go on now to the 2 other witnesses left on the panel, and then I will open it up for questions on behalf of Chair Clippinger and I. So now I have Dr. Jan Bird, and then it's gonna follow by Roslyn Selman and Ronnie Taylor, and then we'll open it up for question. Dr. Bird, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Janice Bird, a board-certified obstetrician and gynecologist, retired after 35 years of practice in Annapolis. I strongly support this bill, and I have 2 comments about it. First, this bill is really needed for the minority of patients whose pain and suffering cannot be adequately controlled. I cared for thousands of patients in my career as an obstetrician gynecologist, and it was a privilege to provide the best medical care I could. OBGYNs provide care over one's lifetime from cradle to grave. In the small minority of my patients with terminal cancer, such as ovarian cancer, they may experience profoundly debilitating pain and suffering, begging for a peaceful end. They wanted a dignified, peaceful way to bring an end to their inevitable death for themselves and witnessed by their loved ones. I've been present at deaths that were prolonged by pain and suffering that was not alleviated with the best of hospice and palliative care, including that of my 91-year-old father. And secondly, it is reasonable and ethical for physicians to choose to participate in such programs. And it's sometimes said that participation violates the Hippocratic Oath, which it does not violate the modern Hippocratic Oath. It has changed over centuries, and now at least 116 of 122 U.S. medical schools now administer oaths that accommodate medical aid in dying. The entire focus of aid in dying involves an option and requires a conversation, an interaction, an evaluation, informed consent, and perhaps a prescription within legally defined standards. It is ethical and it is compassionate, and these are components of the Hippocratic Oath. I am one of many physicians who fully support this law that ensures patients have the legal process to choose a means to end their pain and suffering when their inevitable death is near. This bill doesn't stop death from occurring, but it can greatly diminish suffering and allows for personal autonomy. So physicians may choose to participate in treating these patients. There is no requirement, and deciding to take the drug, if obtained, following a very strict protocol, is truly the patient's option or not. So patients are asking for this law. We all need and deserve this law. So please vote favorably for this bill, the End of Life Option Act. Thank you.
And thank you for being with us. We appreciate it. Next, we have Roslyn Selman, followed by Ronnie Taylor.
Good
Roslyn.
afternoon. Good afternoon, delegates. I greet you in the strong and the mighty name of Jesus Christ. I want to begin by offering my deepest gratitude for the Health and Government Operations and Committee, and specifically to the chair. As noted, my name is Reverend Rosalind Selman, and I stand before you today as an itinerant elder in the African Methodist Episcopal Church, a board-certified clinical chaplain, and a pastoral counselor with the College of Pastoral Supervision and Psychotherapy. I have dedicated much of my chaplaincy to home hospice care with individuals from all walks of life, from atheists to Jews to Protestants to Catholics, indigenous people, Euro-Americans, and more. And through this work, I have learned the sacredness of death. The process often filled with tears and comfort and compassion. These experiences have led me to a heightened sensitivity to the End of Life Option Act. But today, I do not stand before you cloaked in titles or achievements. I stand here as a Black woman in the United States of America, a nation that has historically and continues today to deny Black people their autonomy, a nation that has failed to pass the Honorable John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, a nation that denies truth and seeks to erase Black history from our textbooks, a nation that has weaponized access and choice, telling me what I can do with my own body, a nation that seems intent on repeating history, using the word of God to enslave us, all in the name of making America great again. And for as long as I can remember, Black people have been fighting for the right to choose. HB 1328 does not seek to constrain, it liberates. This bill does not advocate for impeding on the most sacred time in someone's life. Instead, the work is rooted in the belief that informed choices can lead to dignified, peaceful, end-of-life experiences where conversations about death and dying are normalized, where individuals are supported in making choices that align with their desires and their dignity. The bill acknowledges that both life and death is between the Creator and creation. Contrary to the supremacy that has polluted America, Black people possess the intellectual and moral capacity to make informed and wise decisions. We are made in God's image, endowed with wisdom, and created to be free from the constraints imposed by men's limited imagination. If you are followers of Jesus Christ, then you know that his personal relationship with God guided him to understand when his mission on earth was completed. Jesus chose to die.
If I may, our timer is not working. So if you have like 30 more seconds.
Okay. The central question here for Bill 1328 is, will the House stand in opposition to the supremacist movement and uphold the rights of its citizens, including Black people? I pray that the House will make the right choice and will stand on the right side of history and will remove the shackles from our autonomy. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you so much for being here with us. We really appreciate your time, okay? And your efforts. Now we're going to go on to Ronnie Taylor. Ronnie Taylor, for the record, we call Ronnie Taylor and he is not here. So we're gonna put not here and we're gonna open it up for questions. Delegate Hill, I'm now going to open it up for both committees. The first hand that I saw was Delegate Kaufman. Delegate Kaufman. You are
Yes,
muted.
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you, Madam Chair. I was just trying to unmute, and I do have a couple questions for the sponsor, but they will be the only questions I ask during this hearing. My question, Delegate Hill, is within the disability community, there's a lot of concerns about how potentially people with intellectual disabilities could be taken advantage of with this bill, or that people's caregivers would give it to them. But you have tried to, I think, address those concerns. So if you could talk about that. And my second concern is when I spoke to you offline, you stated that there are several amendments you made to the bill from last year's text in response to what you thought were legitimate concerns by the opponents of this legislation. So if you could briefly walk us through those, that'd be great. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Delegate Kaufman, and thank you for the questions. As I said in my opening statement, I think one of the strongest things about this bill that was added when former Chair Pendergrass carried it was the provision that the patient making the request has to have at least one time where they're making the request and having a discussion with the physician privately. No aides, no assistants, no family members. That was put in specifically so that the question of coercion could be openly asked, probed, and answered. And that has continued in this bill, and I think it's one of the strongest. With respect to other provisions, you'll see in the testimony that the ARC has suggested some language. I'm going to pull that up right quickly. That they would like to see with respect to saying that the two physicians cannot be part of the same practice. This is an amendment that I don't think, we would have any problem taking, and I think it makes sense. There's some other language about agreements of remuneration, and I think that may be a little bit too vague and broad. But I think that just saying they can't be part of the same practice or finding somewhere in there, and I understand what their concerns are with that. The second thing that they asked for, and obviously the ARC, while representing a significant part of the disability community does not represent all. They are certainly well-respected advocates in that area. And they have also requested that there be some specific reporting criteria. The way the bill is written now, the Department of Health is required to get certain information so that we can have some data, and they have specific requests of what that data should include. This would be an amendment we will discuss with them, with other advocates, and with the Department of Health. But on its face, I don't have a problem with moving forward with those. And I think the other changes from last year's bill that you and I spoke about is there was some testimony last year where the pharmacists, who are also, just as the physicians, are also able to participate optionally, meaning they're not required to participate if they're requested to, that they felt that they wanted some shoring up of the protections if they choose to participate, and their protections if they choose not to. So both conscientious objection to participation protections and participatory protections. And we think we thought they were strong in the bill as presented last year and in previous years, but we made sure to make sure that those were more clear.
Thank you, Dr. Hill. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. Next, I saw Delegate Morgan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd be remiss if I didn't start off by saying hi to our former chairman. My friend Shane Pendergrass was on there, so I just wanted to say hello. My question is for Delegate Hill. Thank you for the bill. Very touchy subject. These hearings are always hard. I think we've heard this bill, six, maybe even seven times. We started going back. I think we probably are in this for about 30 or 40 hours of hearings on this topic. You addressed it a little bit with Delegate Coughlin's question, but I wanted you to elaborate a little bit more. I remember when my grandfather was in hospice, one of the things that was really concerning for him was that his life savings were just getting spent, and that he was just there. And really, I'm not sure if he would have taken this medication, but I can tell you that he felt like he was burdening others. And I would be a little bit wary, or for those of us who are a little weary on this legislation, how can you address those concerns, I guess, of someone that might be making a decision not because of their own health, but how their health is affecting others?
Sure. Thank you for the question, Delegate Morgan. Yeah, it's an interest. So let me just answer by first taking it out of the context of a terminal illness. All right. So when people have chronic illness, debilitating illnesses, or things that go on a long time, I don't care if it's recovering from a bad car accident, the issue of, how much support they require, who's providing it to them, what it takes away. We deal with these issues all the time. If someone has to take off from work or give up their job because someone needs a family caregiver. These are real issues in people's lives, and there's nothing that would make or should make anyone think that it's different at the end of life. Those are the kinds of issues you deal with. And when we talk about that individual conversation with the physician, that's part of that conversation, right? So I think in past years, people have thought that you should at no way be thinking about what continuing down this road means to people. So let me first say, terminal illness means terminal, right? Terminal illness doesn't mean chronic illness, doesn't mean long-term illness. It means you're dying actively, and you're dying actively from this disease. So even when people are denied this option, we're talking about maybe the difference between 2 weeks, 6 weeks. We're not talking about you could have lived to whatever. There's no forcing you to take it. In my experience, and I'm sure you have had some family experience, people know. I had my great-grandmother, well into her 80s, was being treated for breast cancer. Hers was the opposite. She said to me one day, I'm only continuing with the chemo because I don't want to let the family down, right? So her concern wasn't that she was being a burden. Her concern was that they needed her to keep fighting. One of my mother's greatest regrets 30 years later is that when her brother was in his final days, the cachexia, the weight loss, couldn't eat, couldn't whatever, and we, were getting him into some research protocol, and they were scheduled to pick him up, and she was there, and she kept saying, fight, 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 and she stepped out of the room, and he died. And she just knew that he waited till she stepped out of the room because she didn't know how to let him go, right? So I don't think it is fair to expect that anyone dealing with a terminal illness, whether they're considering this option or not, isn't weighing the full impact of their dying process on their family members, their loved ones, and themselves. That's part of being in a caring community, right? But what we're trying to say, and by adding the language that says you can't qualify solely based on your age, disability, or specific illness, is it's not enough that you're dying. That doesn't make you qualified. This shouldn't be considered, but I think it would be wrong to expect that people aren't taking into account all of those things, your grandfather's finances, what it means to his wife, how old she's getting, if she's getting sleep at night. But they're weighing it in the context of what they're dealing with. It's a little bit like thinking that suffering only means pain. There are a whole lot of colors to suffering. And we can't define for anybody what that means.
I
Thank you.
appreciate
That
you
answers your question.
answering the
Thank you.
question and everything. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. So let's try to keep the questions short, and the answers to the extent we can short as well. We have next from Judiciary, Delegate Conway.
Thank you, chairs. Thank you, panelists for coming in to testify. To the witness, I think, Salmon, I didn't really understand the African-American Jesus chose to die connection. I didn't understand. Could you just briefly give me a summary of what it is you're talking about?
Yeah, I'm in simple terms, to keep the answer short, as the chair has requested, I am talking about choice and the autonomy that Black and African Americans have been denied historically and are currently being denied. When I talk about Jesus Christ, that Jesus chose to die on the cross. He had the power to withstand the enemy, and it was by his choice that he chose to do so.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We have next from HGO, Delegate Chisholm.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Well-
I'll make a statement real quick and then my question. To claim that Jesus and the passion and the crucifixion should be equated to assisted suicide is an abomination and sickening, to be honest with you.
Delegate Chisholm, can you please just ask your question?
Yes,
Thank
thank you,
you so
Madam
much.
Chair.
I
I
appreciate you.
apologize.
Apology accepted. Let's just go to the question. Thank you so much.
As Delegate Morgan was saying, this is like our 7th year, and I still hold the same reservations about this bill, and it's more the vulnerable. The reason the ARC wants out of this bill, and I haven't even looked at their amendment, I'm sure is because there are a lot of vulnerable people. Just because, there are people that are disabled that still are of full mind and body, but, like my aunt, Brenda, who lived with us for 9 years with Down syndrome, there's people that can't communicate, and that's always going to be my concern with this type of legislation. People that with Alzheimer's starting to lose their mind, or the elderly that may not all be all the way there. And I just don't know if there's enough protections that can ever be able to be put in place to make sure that the most vulnerable amongst us are not taken advantage of and coerced into choosing these things. Because once again, just like Delegate Morgan and some other people have alluded to, the end of life is where we spend all our money. Unfortunately, it's the most expensive part. And, I'd hate to think that some of those that can't speak up for themselves are forced into or coerced into something like this because of financial reasons or because of the pain that those around them are feeling, and maybe not, I know that they still need to be terminally ill, but I worry that, we're not doing our part to protect those that can't speak up for themselves or speak in a way that we can fully understand. And if Delegate Hill wants to reassure me, I'd be open to hearing.
Thank you,
Madam
Delegate
Chair.
Chisholm. Isn't that so, right? So I'd be happy to have a conversation, and I take that as an invitation to have a one-on-one conversation offline. We can go through the bill. I would say, first of all, that people who can't speak for themselves or who are incapable of making, they're not eligible for the bill, right? They're just not eligible. So that's how we're protecting them. They're not eligible for exactly the people you described. And I also say the ARC is very clear. They're not asking for out of the bill. They've been out of the bill before. What they're saying is we're willing to be supportive under the certain conditions. So I think that was a mischaracterization. But yes, we can have that conversation offline. But bottom line, if you can't express yourself, you don't have Alzheimer's people can't do this bill. You can't request this in advance of it. You can't say, if I get Alzheimer's, please allow me to do that. We've had people who've asked to be able to give advance directives to do this. It's not in the bill. We're not allowing it. So you can make the decision at the time that death is imminent. And if you're competent, great. If you're not competent, I'm sorry. If you can't self-administer, you're not in either. And I've had, know of many people with chronic illnesses like ALS, who would like to, who fight for a long time for quality of life. And when it finally goes, would like to be able to take advantage of this. They're not allowed either. They're not allowed. for those protections that you asked for. Thank you.
Okay, we have the last question for this panel. I don't see any judiciary members, but I do see one from HGO, the Vice Chair, Delegate Collison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Delegate, for bringing this bill. So I've heard a lot about autonomy and self-direction. And my understanding, Delegate Hill, is that right now, as Maryland law stands, we have the autonomy to be able to, as you said, withdraw nutrition, refuse liquid, water, hydration. So that would be one way for us to make this decision. So can you tell me the difference in what the experience would be between making the decision to have medical aid in dying versus either starving or dehydrating myself?
Thank you. Thank you for the question, Madam Vice Chair. I think that to understand what the quality of dying is like when you are conscious or drugged out, dehydrated, lips chapped, tongue stuck, you'd have to see it. It is not pretty. If you want to know what dying is like when you're starving yourself to death with abdominal cramps, feeling hunger pangs, you need to experience just 2 days of not eating. It'll get you there, but it is not a way to go if you have a choice. Similarly, without this bill, people can overdose, right? But there's no assurance when you overdose that it's going to work. So there you are puking, not dying, more miserable than when you started, and still stuck waiting for those extra days to go by. Torturing yourself is not what we want when we talk about dignity and dying. And the ability, again, to have those people who you love and want to see have some sense that in the next few hours you will probably be gone. I've been there at the bedside of people when the tube's been taken away without this, and it is a wonderful feeling to be able to walk and accompany people through those last things. And again, what this bill allows people to do is not look for those extreme measures that are difficult and painful, not to shoot themselves in the head, not to mistake the medication, to have some assurance that they can have a reasonable death when they are ready to exit their dying process. They're dying anyway. We're exiting the dying process. And as I always say, everyone's talking about heaven, but when we get here, it seems like nobody wants to go.
Thank you, Delegate.
I do see one more question, and this is really the last question for this panel, Delegate Shalega.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. I did want to say hi to our former chair. Nice to see you, Shane. I just wanted to ask a follow-up to Delegate Hill. Your description, hence why my hand went up, sounded like we don't have palliative care measures. And, it's my understanding that folks at the end of their life, when they're, in that stage, are not suffering as you've described it, but they are given quite a bit of medication that comforts them at the end of their life. So, am I wrong? Is this the horrific death that you see so many have?
Great question, Delegate Shalega. Thank you. Death varies, right? So for many people, palliative care and hospice care give them exactly the exit and the comfort that they want, okay? And the majority of people who request aid in dying are actually in hospice care. But hospice care doesn't solve it for everybody. It doesn't give them the most peaceful, dignified way of dying. For example, there are many people who do not want to participate fully in the medications offered in hospice care because it will take them out of being able to engage with the people they care about. Often the drugs send them into a state of euphoria, or not even euphoria, that would be the wrong word, but they're just not there. And what they want to be able to do is to be with the family, to be able to converse, to be able to quiet. And I've seen deaths that are just quiet and peaceful without any kind of assistance, and deaths with assistance that are, but I've also seen it the other way. And because every death is an individual experience that none of us can go through with them, the purpose of this bill and the reason I support it is I want you to have the opportunity to have a death that fits your decision about dignity. I want Delegate Cullison to have what fits hers, and I want Delegate Chisholm to have what fits his, and I want you to allow me to have the kind of death
Yeah,
that
and that wasn't my point.
that my disease process has. So the answer is no.
Yeah,
Yes,
I
palliative
Thank
One
care
you.
second, Delegate Shalega, let her
it
finish.
can help,
Yeah.
but
One
it is
second.
not the answer for everyone, and it
Thank you,
doesn't.
Madam
Oh.
Chair.
One
I was,
second, Delegate Shalega.
yeah, I was
Listen,
trying
one
to speed it
second.
up.
No, don't worry about it. Just wait until she's done, okay? And
Okay.
Delegate Hill, when she speaks, you do the same, okay? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I was just
One
trying
second,
to,
Delegate Hill, wait, are you done?
I've muted. Yes, ma'am.
yeah.
All right, thank you. Delegate Shalega.
Thank you. I wasn't trying to create a problem, but trying to speed up the process here and just say I
This
understood.
becomes a little chaotic, so let's
Yes.
just finish.
All right, thank you. I just wanted to address what I thought was an overly dramatic description that left out palliative care and how we care for people at their death. So I appreciate that, and thanks for the opportunity.
You're
Thank you.
welcome.
And let me just be clear. Palliative care and hospice are an important part of the process. They're not enough for some people.
Okay, thank you both for the courtesy, and let's just try to remember that, okay? Thank you so much. Delegate Chair Clippinger, would you like to take the unfavorable panel? And just as a reminder for the unfavorable panel, you get 2 minutes to present your testimony, okay? Thank you.
Thank you. I believe I have this right. Ann Hansen, Mary Han, Laura Bogley, and Joseph Marine.
That's correct.
Ms. Hansen, please, for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Clippinger, Chair Pinion Melnick. Thank you for the opportunity to testify here today. My name is Dr. Annette Hansen, and I am a forensic psychiatrist speaking on behalf of the Maryland Psychiatric Society in opposition to House Bill 1328. You have our written testimony, so I'm not going to go into details here. I just want to address 2 major concerns. The first concern is that this bill will create conflicts and confusion regarding our involuntary mental health treatment laws. For the sake of time, I won't go into details, but I'm happy to answer questions about specific scenarios. A bigger concern is that this bill will have serious implications for our state facilities, specifically our prison system and our state psychiatric hospital system. I know that the judiciary heard several bills last week about the medical parole process, how long it can take, how impossible it is to get released from medical parole. Our prison patients have trouble trusting their doctors to begin with, and if word gets around that our doctors in fact facilitate and help people kill themselves, I can't think of a worse way to damage the doctor-patient relationship for an institutionalized patient. Similarly, in our state psychiatric hospital system, we have people with serious chronic medical conditions that could be terminal if the person refused treatment. And remember, the bill does not require the patient to accept any treatment. So a patient with diabetes could refuse insulin and become terminal under this law. Our laws were changed a couple years ago to allow our psychiatric patients to challenge their treatment plan through the patient grievance system. This means that a patient in our psychiatric hospital who wants to die can file a request in front of an administrative law judge, and if that judge determines that the patient is qualified, they would cut an order requiring the attending physician, again, a member of the hospital staff, to prescribe lethal medication to a patient. This means that members of my committee who work in state facilities would have three choices. They could go along with it and prescribe the medication. They could refuse to go along with it and take the consequences of violating a court order, or they could quit their job. And so I can't think of anything that would have more of a chilling effect on our ability to recruit and retain physicians in our state systems. Thank you, and I'm available for questions.
Thank you. Mary Hand, please. Mary Hand. Okay. Laura Bogley, please, for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Clippinger and Chair Pena-Melnick, members of the committee. I'm Laura Bogley, Executive Director of Maryland Right to Life. And we once again urge your unfavorable report on this bill, which would shield healthcare providers who put profits before patients with deadly consequences. The Supreme Court held in Washington v. Glucksberg in 1997 that a right to aid in dying was not protected by the Due Process Clause. Still, I am here to testify to the fact that a procedure that begins as safe, legal, and rare can quickly become an unregulated monopoly that deprives patients access to life-saving alternatives. For many of those who lack the financial means or on government insurance, for example, a right to die becomes a duty to die. This is because the motive behind so-called mercy killing is not to end patient suffering, which we can manage through healthcare, but to cut costs. Derek Humphrey, who was the founder of the Hemlock Society, the precursor of Compassion and Choices, admitted that, quote, economics, not the quest for broadened liberties or increased autonomy, will drive assisted suicide to the plateau of acceptable practice, end quote. Make no mistake, assisted suicide is not about the 1% who may actually choose their death, but about the other 99% who could be denied the right to refuse death under this new policy. Patients are relying on you because they do not have equal bargaining power with giant insurance corporations or hospital administrators and death panels. A vote to legalize physician-assisted suicide is a vote to make involuntary euthanasia an acceptable medical practice. The difference between these two forms of killing is simply time, and proponents support both. We urge you to put patients before profits and keep assisted suicide in the criminal code where it belongs. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to ask for Mary Hand again because I believe that she was speaking while she was muted. Okay, Ms. Hand, please, for 2 minutes.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon. A substantial concern I have about the End of Life Option Act as an RN of 5 decades, whose mother and mother-in-law benefited from hospice care and whose nursing colleagues have been drawn to hospice nursing over the years, is that patients who seek medical aid in dying may miss out on what traditional hospice nursing care offers, and that is supporting the natural dying process, providing anticipatory comfort care with sanctioned medications and doses to relieve pain and breathing difficulty, and rendering them and their families emotional support. Medical aid and dying laws have complicated operations for hospice agencies in the 11 states where it is now legal. 78% have restricted staff from being present, that's nursing staff, at the time of patient self-administration or between ingestion and death. National nursing organizations have tried to provide guidance for hospice nurses based on Nurses' Code of Ethics, but it is conflicting. It ranges from nurses being ethically prohibited from administering aid and dying medication to not abandoning these patients. The Hospice and Palliative Nurses Association has recognized that nurses employed in states where aid and dying is legal may experience significant moral and ethical conflict. Data show that At least 1 in 20 patients experiences choking, vomiting, or seizures or other complications during ingestion of the poisonous cocktail and a range of death times. It is a conundrum for nurses to leave patients and families to experience what can be an unpredictable death without their emotional support. If we want the best end-of-life care for dying patients and families, including our families in Maryland, we need to continue to preserve traditional hospice and palliative care nursing. We want to keep hospice nurses at the bedside where they want to be and where they belong. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll hear now from Joseph Marine, please, for 2 minutes. Mr. Marine. I don't see him. If he should emerge here in a second, we'll go back and bring him on. But for now, we'll take questions for this first panel. Anyone would like to ask questions of this panel, please raise your hands. Delegate Kipke from HGO.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To Ann Hansen, could you give an example of, you had a lot of information. I know you're limited to 2 minutes. You had referenced providing an example. You said examples, but really, if you could just give us an example of what your concerns look like. Thank you.
Sure. I'd like to specifically address some of our involuntary treatment law issues. And I'm concerned about this because this is what I teach to psychiatry residents. And so if this law passes, I'm going to have to explain what all of this means and how it interacts. Now, under this law, a patient does not have to tell their family that they're thinking about doing this or that they've obtained the medication. So if a family member suddenly discovers it, it's not unusual. They would want to have this person emergently evaluated for psychiatric issues. The only way they can do that is either to call the police to the scene or to go to court and seek an emergency petition. It's really not clear under this law whether or not the police would actually be able to do anything about this unless the person actually had the medication in hand and was about to take it right then. It's also not clear whether or not a district court judge would grant an emergency petition if the person obtained the medication legally through this new process, and so the family would be stymied. Now assume that one of those two ways worked and the person actually was transported to an emergency room. Now you're going to have a mental health clinician, either a psychiatrist, a nurse practitioner, a psychiatric social workers. One of those people is then going to have to decide, does this person qualify for an involuntary admission, or are they, as a matter of law, disqualified because they have a right to kill themselves? Now, you talk about, right to refuse participation. There's a scenario whether the clinician has to participate, whether they want to or not, whether they realized it or not, they have to express an opinion about a capacity to kill themselves. Now, assume again, you skip through that step, they decide that the person has lost capacity, or they actually have lost capacity. They get admitted to an inpatient unit, they go to a civil commitment hearing. Now, again, you're in front of administrative law judges. And so they have to give testimony about whether or not an involuntary admission is a least restrictive alternative to, or are there other ways of caring for the problem, right? And so the doctor testifying at a commitment hearing would have to opine whether or not suicide was a less restrictive alternative to a civil commitment. This is not a hypothetical problem. This has already happened to a colleague of mine in a state where this is legal. They had someone going to a commitment hearing for anorexia, and they were asked whether or not suicide was a less restrictive alternative to an involuntary admission. I'd like to point out, too, the irony. This is Eating Disorders Awareness Week. We are debating this bill on the very day when the Maryland Office of Suicide Prevention was tweeting out information about the importance of suicide prevention for people with eating disorders. Okay? So are we supposed to provide suicide prevention services? Or are we supposed to facilitate it for people with anorexia? Got to make up your mind. That was a long answer to a short question. I hope that answered your question.
Thank you.
Are there other questions for this panel? All right, seeing none, I will move on now to a panel of those in favor, and we'll begin this panel. Richard Shermansky, Laura Schrank, Elizabeth Morrison, Dan Diaz. Mr. Shermansky. Mr. Shermansky. Okay. Laura Schrank. Laura Schrank. Elizabeth Morrison. I don't know if everybody's muted and we're just having a problem or.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, they're coming on, I was told.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, I'll go back and I'll ask for Mr.
I'm here.
Shermansky. Okay, they're popping up now. All right. So
I'm
Richard.
here.
All right. Is Mr. Shermansky there?
If I may, Mr. Chairman, they're
If you're
coming on.
listening, I need you to turn that down. Go back and I'll ask for Mr. Shermansky. There we go. Okay. I'll go with Miss Morrison. Elizabeth Morrison, please. Let's go ahead and hear from you.
Mr. Chairman, they're coming on.
Listening, I need you to turn that down. Go back and I'll ask for Mr. Shermansky.
Okay.
Okay. I'll go with Miss Morrison. Elizabeth Morrison, please.
Sure.
Let's go ahead.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes, but please turn off the feed that you're watching in the background. Oh boy. Now you're muted.
Okay. Sure. Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes. Please turn off the feed that you're watching in the background.
Oh, I see. Got it. Thank you.
Now.
Okay. Thank you. And thank you for allowing me to testify today in support of this End-of-Life Option Act. I am Dr. Elizabeth Morrison. I'm a Maryland psychiatrist and I support this bill. I speak for myself. I have 3 points to make. First, aid in dying and suicidal patients are fundamentally different. Suicide is the intentional infliction of harm to cause death. It is a pathological reaction to a problem that otherwise would not cause death. Patients seeking medical aid in dying are dying. They have terminal illnesses that will imminently cause death. Their motivation to seek aid in dying is to reduce suffering. These are individuals who, but for their terminal illness, want to live. I'd also like to make a comment about patients with anorexia nervosa. Anorexia nervosa is not a qualifying condition for this bill. But what happens with these individuals is they end up starving themselves to a point where they become eligible for aid in dying because they have starved and themselves to a point where their organs are shutting down. So I just want to make it clear, it's not the diagnosis of anorexia nervosa that qualifies for aid in dying. My second point.
Sorry.
I don't think I got 2 minutes. I think there was a lot of, difficulty getting started.
Give you another 30 seconds because it was difficult to get you started because you had it on in the background. So please go ahead for 30 seconds.
Okay, thank you very much. It's unreasonable to require mandatory mental health professional evaluations of everyone seeking aid in dying. There's hard data to support this. There have been 2 studies involving a total of 261 patients.
from the state of Hawaii and the University of California at San Francisco, where mental health evaluations were required. And the studies found that zero patients lacking in capacity due to a psychiatric condition. And basically, the attending and consulting physicians both got it right. So both studies concluded that mandatory mental health evaluations are not necessary.
I'm sure
My
that
last
people,
point is a majority of Maryland psychiatrists do support aid in dying. The Maryland Psychiatric Society conducted a poll of its members in 2022. 50% agreed or somewhat agreed. Thank you.
thank you. For those who are going to testify, it's important that you turn off there are two feeds. You're going to have your Zoom link where you're going to be able to testify with everybody. But if you're watching it on the MGA website, you must turn that off before you testify because you're on a delay. So you'll hear what I say, but then it's 20 seconds later and it results in me furrowing my brow and looking cranky. And my committee is used to that, but I'm trying to do better for HGO. All right, let's try this now. Mr. Shermansky, please. All right, Laura Schrank.
I'm here.
All right, great. For 2 minutes, please.
Hello, my name is Laura Schrank, and I live in District 33. I am testifying today because on March 11th, 2025, my dear friend, a longtime Anne Arundel County resident, will die. But she won't die at home surrounded by people who love her. Instead, she is spending her final 15 days in a strange city, in a strange bed with only 2 family members at her side. My friend was diagnosed with ALS less than a year ago. Since then, we have watched this cruel disease rapidly rob her of her ability to speak, to move, to breathe freely. Last month, as her throat began to close, she texted me in a panic. Her doctors confirmed that she had less than 6 months to live, and yet in Maryland, she faced only 2 horrifying choices. 1, be forced into a nursing home, having a feeding tube inserted, and wait helplessly for months as her body slowly shuts down and she can no longer breathe. 2, decline the feeding tube and starve to death over the course of weeks, sedated into oblivion. Neither of these were real choices. Nothing could be done to save her. ALS is relentless, irreversible, and untreatable. The options Maryland offered her were torturous and only prolonged her suffering and the suffering of her loved ones. She wanted another option. If it were you or your loved ones, wouldn't you? So she reached out to me. Time was running out, her body was failing, and if she lost the ability to swallow, her chance at a medically assisted death would be gone. By sheer luck, through a Unitarian Universalist church in Vermont, we found what Maryland refused to offer her: compassion, dignity, and a way to die on her terms. Thanks to the kindness of strangers, my friend now faces her final days not with fear, but with peace. And while I grieve the fact that I will never get to say goodbye to her in person, I am forever grateful to Vermont for giving her the bodily autonomy Maryland denied her. This is what we need to be, Maryland. A place of compassion, a place of safe harbor, a state where we empower our terminally ill residents with real choices so they can leave this world on their own terms with dignity, with grace, and without unnecessary suffering. Maryland, it's time to do better. Please pass HB 1328 End of Life Option Act for Maryland. Thank you.
Thank you. Dan Diaz, please. Dan Diaz. Mr. Diaz?
Yes, hi. My name is Dan Diaz, and I am Brittany Menard's husband. Brittany died on November 1st, 2014. She was only 29 years old. Brittany experienced a gentle death only because of the option of medical aid in dying. So yes, my wife utilized the very program that we are discussing here today. I am testifying in support of HB 1328. Brittany endured an 8-hour brain surgery, and we researched every treatment option that was available. She had a world-class hospice and palliative care team, but modern medicine is not able to keep a person from suffering in 100% of the cases. To be clear, a terminally ill individual that applies for this option, they are not giving up, they are not suicidal, and they are not deciding between living and dying. The option of living is no longer on the table. The opponents seem to ignore that. A terminally ill Marylander that is in Brittany's predicament is simply afforded the option to ensure a gentle death. Qualifying for this program is not easy. Those safeguards are real. Brittany felt incredibly protected going through this process. It is very frustrating to listen at times to the opposition's misguided claims. They disparage and try to vilify Brittany. They claim that she did something wrong, that she didn't try hard enough. Generally, from a religious point of view, they want to keep this law from passing. But here's the thing, 70% of Catholics nationwide also support this option. I am one of those Catholics. I went to Catholic school, was an altar boy, confirmation, all of it. I will not impose my religious views onto anyone else. Please avoid imposing yours onto Brittany. In closing, this program does not result in more people dying. It simply results in fewer people suffering. Thank you, and feel free to ask if you have questions on Brittany's experience.
One last time for Richard Shermansky.
I'm here.
Mr. Shermansky, please, for 2 minutes.
Thank you. I speak today as I strongly support the End of Life Option Act embodied by Senate Bill 0443 and House Bill 0403, named after the Honorable Elijah E. Cummings and the Honorable Shane E. Pendergrass. I'm an advocate for this legislation as an attorney who faces the challenges of learning disabilities and ADHD. My personal journey has shaped my perspective on the values we hold dear: autonomy, independence, and self-determination. However, my story takes an even deeper dimension as I now advocate not only as an attorney with disabilities, but also as a father of a son with autism. Additionally, I am proud to serve on the Montgomery County Commission for People with Disabilities, and as I'm currently in my second term. In my capacity on the commission, I have had the privilege of working directly with individuals who navigate the complexities of disabilities daily. The experience has further deepened my commitment to disability rights advocacy. As we discuss the Honorable Elijah E. Cummings and the Honorable Shane E. Pendergrass Act today, it is vital to acknowledge the interconnectedness of medical aid in dying and disability rights movements, both of which I actively champion. Recent polls have revealed that 79% of those with disabilities support medical aid in dying for terminally ill, mentally capable adults. This resounding endorsement reinforces our shared values, irrespective of the diverse challenges we may face. It is a call to uphold the dignity and agency of every individual. The legislation we discuss today is not a mere legal matter. It is a profound reflection of our humanity and the values that define us. It invites us to consider the broader implications of compassion, empathy, and the inherent dignity of every human being, regardless of their abilities and health condition. Moreover, I want to take a moment to emphasize the significance of the End of Life Option Act in the context of my personal journey. Faced with learning disabilities and ADHD, I navigated a very challenging path to becoming an attorney. The experience of overcoming my own perceived limitations has fueled my commitment to advocate not only for the rights of those facing end-of-life decisions, but also for the broader principles of inclusiveness and empowerment. In discussing the end-of-life option, we delve into the very essence of our humanity. This legislation is an opportunity for us to reevaluate our social values and ensure that our laws reflect a commitment to individual autonomy and dignity. In conclusion, I urge each of you to consider the significance of these bills, and I thank you for your time and consideration.
All right, thank you very much. Just as a note, Joseph Marine, who is an unfavorable panelist, has joined us, but we're not going to take him just yet. We'll take questions for this panel, and then we'll go to the next panel of unfavorable witnesses. This is a panel of favorable witnesses, however, please. If you have questions, now would be the time. Does anyone have questions for this panel? All right, we thank you all very much for your testimony today, and we'll go to the next panel of unfavorable witnesses, including Mr. Marine, Joseph Marine, Christine Seibert, Dr. James Kelly, Nicole LeBlanc, and Deborah Mercado. Mr. Marine, are you on? Mr. Marine. Please remember to unmute yourself. We'll give him another chance here in a moment. Christine Seibert.
Can you hear me?
Yes, and you can go ahead for 2 minutes, please.
Thank you, committee members. I'm Christine Seibert, a pharmacist and a resident of District 31. While the goal to reduce human suffering is a noble one, assisted suicide is not healthcare. Regardless of attempts to redefine it, we are talking about legalizing suicide for some of us, which devalues all of us. There are many flaws in this bill outlined in my written statement, but here are 2 key points. Number 1, this deadly prescription is not a simple bottle of pills that is easy to swallow. The current concoction equals 400 tablets of digoxin, 100 tabs of Valium, 500 tabs of morphine, 80 tabs of amitriptyline, and 50 tabs of phenobarbital. Crushing up over 1,000 tablets is not something a neighborhood pharmacy would have the time to do. Plus, the tablets have inert ingredients that increase the final volume, making it harder for the patient to take the whole overdose. Therefore, only a special pharmacy that can order bulk powders would be able to fill the prescription. Patients aren't likely to live near the few pharmacies in the state who might agree to compound these, and they don't even have to be a Maryland resident. How far will they drive to get this cocktail? Or will they get the poison in the mail? Will it have the appropriate warning labels required for hazardous medications with ingestion, contact, airborne, and disposal precautions? What if a patient or family member calls their regular pharmacist with questions? What would that pharmacist have to say? Let's imagine. Well, Miss Doe, here's what I know. It's a massive overdose and an experimental procedure. Stored in a secure location because inhaling the vapor or touching the powder could be very harmful to family or pets. The powder is mixed with 2 ounces of clear liquid. Keep shaking or stirring it to prevent settling and missing taking all of the overdose. It can cause nausea, vomiting, and severe burning sensations in your mouth. Drink it within 2 minutes or you risk falling asleep before finishing the overdose. You can expect to die within 2 hours, but it's not guaranteed. Some patients take several days to die and some survive the overdose. If you don't die quickly, other side effects may include seizures, arrhythmias, and coma. That doesn't sound dignified to me. Number 2, there have been some protections added for pharmacists who do not wish to participate, but there should also be immunity from civil liability from a patient caregiver or employer penalties. Plus, protections should be added for all healthcare workers who object. Please reject this bad medicine and vote unfavorable. Thank you.
All right, we'll go to Dr. James Kelly, please. Dr. Kelly? All right, what about Nicole LeBlanc?
Here.
All right, you'd like to go ahead
hello.
for 2 minutes, please. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Nicola Blank from Silver Spring, Maryland. I'm on the autism spectrum. I'm here to ask that you oppose this bill, otherwise known as Death with Dignity. This legislation concerns and affects me greatly because of the message it sends to people with disabilities, the elderly, and our young people. On a personal note, I had a cousin who committed suicide and was a cancer survivor out of the middle of nowhere. By legalizing PAS, we are creating a double standard where some folks get suicide prevention, others get physician-assisted suicide, which is a clear violation of the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act. PAS is often not freely chosen because people with disabilities don't want to be seen as burdens to their families, which leads to this being the only option, especially when there's no robust support system. With so many inequities in our healthcare and long-term care system, it is not possible for vulnerable citizens to be given real choice at the end of life. Studies have shown that medical professionals tend to misjudge our quality of life based on the fact that we are dependent on others for support. As we have seen during the pandemic, our healthcare system, has very ableist towards people with disabilities. For instance, many long haulers have dealt with, ableism. Doctor-assisted suicide conflicts with the APS statute. Our society should be focused on investing in end-of-life palliative care and suicide prevention, especially given that the autism community has a high rate of suicide compared to the general population. If Maryland were to adopt a similar Oregon-style law, it would also conflict with the APS statute because it devalues people with disabilities and and works against the intent of the APS statute to protect vulnerable adults from abuse. People with disabilities need robust healthcare and community-based services and mental health care. Please vote no on this bill. Thank you for listening.
Right. Then Deborah Bricado, please.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Good afternoon. I'm Deborah Bricado, speaking as a survivor of a father's suicide. I urge an unfavorable report
Hello
on
again.
this bill. The AMA states physician-assisted suicide is fundamentally incompatible with the physician's role as healer, would be difficult or impossible to control, and would pose serious societal risks. There were over 49,000 suicides in 2022, or 136 per day. This shows people can commit suicide without forcing others to help. My father battled depression and alcoholism. He was violent and eventually out of work. Mom worked 3 jobs. My siblings and I also worked to pay the bills. He sought treatment with no success. It was essentially dry the drunk out and send him home without addressing the psychological underpinnings. In 1986, he hung himself. That led to years of emotional trauma for our family. I cared for my mother during her battle with cancer. I was pregnant with 2 toddlers and was grateful to care for her. Mom refused pain medicine because she didn't want to sleep her life away. My younger brother died of cancer, and I cared for him too. Prior to getting cancer, he didn't think he'd want to endure it. When actually fighting cancer, all he wanted was more time. We grieved deeply for our mother and brother, but those were not traumatic like our father's suicide because he chose it and it was sudden. We had time with our mother and brother. Killing yourself is a result of despair, not a decision of a healthy mind. This bill normalizes suicide and will help insurance companies to cover suicide drugs over actual life-saving treatment. Healthcare professionals are dedicated to healing. Do not turn them into executioners. Suicide is not a cure for anything. The prescription for death is not pleasant. 100 pills or more, and death can take hours or even days. Shooting someone would be kinder, but I guess that would make it obvious what this bill does. Fear of pain and suffering is not a good reason to sponsor suicide. There is no good reason to promote and fund suicide. People deserve appropriate physical, psychological, and emotional support, not in order to kill themselves. I urge you to stop the desensitization of human life, and please give an unfavorable report on House Bill 1328. Thank you. And I will take any questions about my experience.
Thank you. Joseph Marine, one more time. Mr. Marine. All right, Dr. Kelly, Dr. James Kelly.
I am Dr. James Kelly. I am a physician and a psychiatrist of 39 years. I am speaking on behalf of the Nationwide Association of American Physicians and Surgeons. The American Medical Association Code of Ethics states, and I quote, "Physician-assisted suicide is fundamentally incompatible with the physician's role as a healer. Physician-assisted suicide is fundamentally incompatible with the role of the physician as a healer. Instead of physician-assisted suicide, the physician must respond to the needs of the patient. This bill weaponizes physicians against the most vulnerable patients for profit, and it legalizes abandoning medical ethics and the Hippocratic Oath. I treat folks in jails, an incarcerated population. Maryland has already outlawed the death penalty for violent criminals because it's cruel and inhumane. It's outlawed even if the person on death row wants to die because it's cruel and inhumane. This bill reestablishes the death penalty for law-abiding citizens by authorizing the use of the same cruel and inhumane drugs to kill. Incarcerated citizens are a vulnerable population. Profits will always be greater to substitute death in place of health care. Do not let doctors be weaponized against the most vulnerable patients. Please vote no on this bill.
Joseph Marine, please. Last call. All right, we'll take questions for this panel. Are there any questions for this panel? And after these questions, if any, I'm going to pass it back to Chair Peña-Melnick. Any questions for this panel? All right, seeing none, we thank you all very much, and I'll pass this back to Chair Peña-Melnick, who'll take the next group of favorable supporters for the legislation.
Thank you. Next, we have a panel of favorable: Seth Morgan, Jonathan Alexander, Rabbi Gordon Fuller, Michael Strauss, and Jessa Gillis. Will you please be ready to unmute yourself as soon as we call your name? All right. Who's going to start with Seth Morgan?
Let's make a clarification that I am unfavorable. I'll come into the committee and correct the record.
All right, it was favorable. We'll put you on favorable. Thank you. So let's go with Seth Morgan, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Seth Morgan. As a person with disability and as an advocate for disability rights, assessing the protections for vulnerable populations of any proposed legislation is central to my advocacy. This bill rigorously protects all, including people with disabilities, and here's why. First, no credible case of coercion has ever been reported in over a quarter of a century of experience since Oregon passed this law in 1997. Second, the law makes this option available only to those with a terminal illness, with a foreseeable life expectancy of 6 months or less. Disability is not a terminal illness. Third, the patient must have full capacity to make healthcare decisions to qualify. Individuals with a significant cognitive disability could not use this law. Fourth, no one can authorize use of medical aid in dying for anyone else, even if they have legal power of attorney. Fifth, at least one face-to-face request with their attending physician must happen without anyone else present so as to verify that there is no coercion in the request. Sixth, their physician cannot be a witness to the written request, and at least one of the witnesses must not be a person who is related and someone who would not be an inheritor of the estate of the patient. Seventh, the multiple polls, including Maryland-specific polls, have shown that people with disabilities overwhelmingly support medical aid in dying. And eighth, the patient is not required to use the medication. About 1/3 of all prescriptions are never used, but may give the terminal individual the comfort of knowing that they can fight on and they have the option of use of the medication if it becomes too severe. The choice should be and would be exclusively in the control of the patient. Thank you.
Thank you. Rabbi Gordon Fuller, please.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you as I speak in favor of these end-of-life options in both the House and the Senate. And thank you for your efforts to keep our democracy of free choice strong and going. I speak to you today as an independent rabbi in Howard County. We Jews are a peoplehood as well as a religion, and like all peoples, we are not monolithic. We believe that all voices are important in our community, non-Orthodox as well as Orthodox. Judaism is clearly a religion that celebrates life, as we all know that we drink a toast to life, l'chaim. We are also a religion that believes those lives should be meaningful. We are not a religion that believes in suffering, though we have been forced to suffer through many eras of our 3,500-year history. Specifically, when it comes to death, we have numerous examples of when life is permissibly shortened in order to end suffering. The Talmud has multiple cases of this. One example is when Rabbi Hanania ben Tradion is martyred by the Romans following the Bar Kokhba rebellion in the 2nd century. As he is being wrapped in a Torah scroll to be burned to death, He agrees with a merciful executioner to do whatever was possible to speed up that process so he will suffer less. Both are rewarded by God for their actions, including the executioner who assisted in his death. A contemporary of Rabbi Tradion, Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, was suffering from dysentery. His students were praying fervently for his recovery, but as his maid saw how frequently he had to go to the privy and how severe his suffering was, she prayed to God to take his life. When that didn't happen, she went up to the roof, dropped a jar off of it, which distracted the students praying for his recovery, and at that moment, his life was taken. Thank you for your listening to all these testimonies and for your wisdom in supporting this bill.
Thank you. We have Michael Strauss. Will you please unmute yourself, Michael Strauss?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Very good. I am Dr. Michael Strauss, and I support this bill. We now have 104 state years of aid and dying experience in 10 states plus DC. And I think you need to understand what's never happened in these states. Hope you could look at my written testimony as I speak, because I have some informative graphs. There has never been an increase in the state suicide rate beyond what's happened across all states, as Dr. Hills mentioned earlier. Those states that currently have a higher suicide rate had a higher rate before the introduction of aid and dying. Aid and dying had no impact on the suicide rate. There's been no forced aid and dying in marginalized populations. Also, a graph at the top of page 2 of my testimony shows that in 5 states that publish aid and dying data by race, the percent of patients who are African American, that's the blue bars, are on average 1/6 as high as the African American percentage of each state's population, the orange bars. African Americans use aid and dying dramatically less often than others. There have been no documented cases, none, of unused drugs being abused by patients, and no other groups have ever been shown to be coerced into using aid and dying. There's been no problem of attending physicians evaluating capacity, as Dr. Morrison said, because there are 2 excellent studies showing that they get it right 100% of the time. There's no problem of controlling the location. 95% of deaths happen in the home, 5% in nursing homes. And there have been no credible cases of insurance companies denying medical treatment coverage because the patient has access to aid and dying. So as you hear all these hypothetical claims today, ask the witness or ask yourself, has that ever occurred in the 104 years of state experience? Thank you.
Thank you. Next witness, Jessa Gillis. Will you please unmute yourself? Jessa Gillis. One last time, Jessa Gillis. You are muted. Can you speak, please?
Hello, my name is Jessa Gillis, and I live in Rising Sun, Maryland. I would like to thank House and Government Operations Committee Chair, the chairs, Delegate Pena Melnick and Delegate Klippinger, and committee members for considering my testimony. I'd also like to thank Delegate Hill for her hard work on this bill. I support this legislation, which will allow mentally capable, terminally ill adults the end-of-life care option to obtain prescription medication that they can decide to take to peacefully end their suffering if it becomes unbearable. I was diagnosed with metastatic breast cancer in 2020. While my health is currently stable, I know it is just a matter of time before I run out of options. I am currently on my 5th line of treatment. With each new treatment, the cancer becomes harder to treat, the side effects become more challenging, and the duration the treatment works becomes shorter. Earlier this month, I went to my friend Ruth's funeral. Ruth had stage 4 ovarian cancer and was in hospice for 3 months before she passed. She was a strong proponent of medical aid in dying, but was unable to make the choice for herself because of her state of residence. By the end, she was unable to eat or drink and was in pain even with palliative care measures. I wish she had been able to choose a kinder passing. I would also like that for myself. Seeing Ruth's passing made it clear to me that the time has come for Maryland to join the states who allow their terminally ill citizens a kinder death. I plan to continue treatment as long as I can, but I know there will come a time when there are no more available options. I know that you may not personally believe in this legislation, but I hope that you will help me gain the opportunity to choose a kinder, easier death. Please pass medical aid in dying legislation this session. I want to live, but when my cancer takes over, I want to have the option to end my life peacefully. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your personal story, okay? We hope you recover. Next, we have, actually, we're gonna open it up now for questions from this favorable panel. I see from the judiciary, Delegate Aragon. Delegate, you can unmute yourself. Thank you.
Hello,
Thank you,
can you hear
Madam
me?
Chair. This question is for Mr. Morgan. He had mentioned that there was not a single case of coercive control reported, i.e. domestic violence impacting a person's choice. There are cases of other, like Kiana Dawes in the UK, who was driven to suicide by her partner. She left a note, luckily. I'm just wondering, in the bill, what is the reporting mechanism for someone who has taken the medication to later report that they were coerced?
Well, the allegation of coercion would come from a family member or close friend of someone. But as I said earlier, there's been no credible report of such having happened. There have been some reports in the literature by the opposition, which, however, if you dig deep into the actual cases, for the most part, actually for every part, there is no relationship to this law that we're talking about. It's usually something that is different from this law, or a different scenario completely. The opposition has various references that I'm glad to respond to specifically. I've got about 16 or 17 cases I could answer if there is one that you particularly have in mind.
No, thank you. I just wanted to know how a dead woman might report such a thing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we're going to an unfavorable. Seeing all the questions, we're going to go to an unfavorable panel. We're going to start with Mr. Alexander, followed by Debbie Ryan, Laura Jones, Margaret Quickle, Matt Pagbola, and Janet Conway. Please, when we call you, unmute yourself. When you're done, mute yourself again. Thank you. Mr. Alexander, you can get started. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. I'm Jonathan Alexander. I'm an attorney, legislative counsel for the Maryland Family Institute, here on the Zoom call out of Charles County, Maryland, urging you to reject physicians-assisted suicide. This county, this state as a whole, has an interest in preserving human life. You know, death is overwhelmingly final. It can't be reversed. It can't be mitigated or corrected. And this bill will lead to a Marylander's death or a tourist from out of state's death, regardless of if it's voluntary or coerced, whether it's a rational thought or an irrational moment, whether it's intentional or it's accidental. This bill brings that about. Asking doctors and law enforcement or a coroner to lie about the cause of death compounds the harm that is found in this bill. This bill is so insidious that on page 7 and 8, there's essentially a suicide note. There's a suicide note that as I'm speaking, I could fill out right now. Suicide is a final sentence that we so want to prevent that if you were to dial 988 on your phone right now, the entire Maryland law enforcement and ambulatory apparatus would be dispatched to you in order to save your life. We teach about suicide prevention in our school curriculum. And in no other context where something is criminal could you sign, as I am now, your release of that criminality and say that I want to participate in it. It's sort of a choose your own adventure. On page 7 or 8, you can choose to inform your family or not inform your family. And so for the third time, I'm doing this and choosing not to inform my family. I want to demonstrate just how cavalier this approach is, having a death note within a bill. But that's the nature of this physician's-assisted suicide, consigning an individual to prescribed pills, sending them home to end their life. I'll let you decide whether or not you'd be a witness to this, but urge you to vote against it.
Thank you. Next, we have Debbie Ryan. Debbie Ryan. All right. Laura Jones. Laura Jones, remember you need to unmute yourself when you're called. Laura Jones.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Thank
Okay.
you. Will you be so kind and get started?
Thank you. Yes, every year I explain how this law will threaten my family. In 2016, our teenage daughter was suicidal with a plan to overdose on drugs. And at the same time, my mother-in-law had a terminal illness with a 6-month prognosis. What you might not realize is when you pass this bill, every person with a terminal illness will have to consider this deadly option. And for my mother-in-law, that was frightening. She knew it would be hard for her to resist, and it would tempt her to do something she never would want to do. One academic paper determined suicide rates for people like my daughter increased 6.3% when it's legal. This is a conservative number because of the way the study was conducted. In Maryland, 608 people died from suicide in 2022. A 6.3 increase will mean an additional 38 people will die from suicide if you pass this law. A study from Johns Hopkins states young children with parents who commit suicide are 3 times more likely to commit suicide than children of living parents. Imagine all the sick people who decide to die early so their grandchild has money for college, and instead the child decides to end their life early too. This is far more than a personal choice. It impacts others. What you must understand is suicide is contagious. It spreads like an infection in the mind, a compulsive thought that won't go away. Additional people will commit suicide because someone they know died by drug overdose using the end-of-life option. This is not a hypothetical situation. There are hundreds of studies that confirm suicide contagion is real. The 2017 paper by the American Association of Suicidality has been retired. They are taking another look at the connection between suicide and physician-assisted suicide. If you once thought this was a good idea, it's time to reevaluate your position. I ask you for an unfavorable vote. Thank you.
And thank you for being here and sharing your story. Margaret Quickle, please unmute yourself and give us your testimony.
I am a veterinarian. I've worked in human hospice care, and I have a parent with Parkinson's disease. I'm licensed in Maryland. Part of why I'm licensed in Maryland and not a resident is there's a veterinary shortage right now, which you may not be aware. My concerns about this bill are many. My profession, which utilizes euthanasia for our patients, has the highest suicide rate of any medical profession. 1 in 6 have considered suicide per a CDC study. There's references in my written testimony. While the cause for the mental health crisis in my field are multifactorial, researchers have concluded that the ethical dilemmas, the pressure and the knowledge of drugs, and exposure to euthanasia all play a role. There are also issues with drug diversion, which I fear will increase with the ease of availability. There have been multiple times where individuals have tried to use coercion or pressure to get veterinarians, including myself, to euthanize an animal. I've had people ask me to euthanize a kitten, a 6-week-old kitten, because it was living outside and they were afraid that it would get attacked by a predator, so they wanted me to kill it. There was also another case where a person told me it would be...
Next panel.
There was also another case where a gentleman presented with his aunt's dog. He had said the aunt had left the dog and an inheritance to take care of the dog, but the cough was really annoying and it was disrupting his quality of life, so he wanted me to take care of it. It can become a moral crisis for veterinarians as to when to say yes, when to say no, and there are many gray areas. There have been pets that I have euthanized because I knew, and the owners told me, that if I didn't legally euthanize it, they would roll over it with their car, drown it, or cause other suffering to have the ultimate happen. These situations are morally troubling and do cause a large amount of compassion fatigue and mental health issues. I'm worried about that happening in the human profession.
Thank you. Matt Pabola, please unmute
Yes,
yourself.
hi.
Thank you.
Hello. Thank you, members of the committee, for this opportunity to testify. I am Matt Pavola, a trial lawyer in the state of Maryland of 42 years. While I am a member of MAJ, I'm not testifying as such on their behalf at this moment. My concerns about this bill, this House Bill 1328, are the same that were echoed by Senator Bobby Zirkin, well over a decade ago, when he wouldn't even let it come out of committee because of so many procedural concerns from a due process perspective. I will give credit that many of those concerns, or some of them, many of them have been corrected, but there's still a lot of flaws. What makes it so difficult to procedurally render a good bill is that we're dealing with something precious as human life. This isn't a DJS concern or tax concern or whether we shouldn't do the red line. This is human life, and you have to have it guarded carefully. And as I'm sure the members of this committee know, but just to give you some examples of some defects in this bill as it's currently written, 5-6A-06 allows for a referral to a licensed mental health professional. The only definition of who that person is in letter M in the beginning of definition, and it's very loosey-goosey. And there's no accountability for that person and their opinion, how they render it, what their degree is, what their experience is. And all they have to do is, quote, communicate to the doctor, yeah, the person who wants to end their life is of good health. Very open to abuse. Self-administration, 5-6A-07, waives the requirement to notify next of kin. Bad idea. You always want to be able to let next of kin know about something this enormous. And I see my time's running out. There are other procedural defects, but I'll have to give up for those now. Thanks so much.
Thank you for your testimony. Janet Conway. Janet Conway. Debbie Ryan.
Chair Penny-Melnick,
Yes.
got a text that Debbie Ryan did not get the link. Is there a way to send that to her and she can maybe come in later?
Hi, this is Steph. I just sent her the link less than 5 minutes ago.
Okay. Thank you. So we're going to actually open it up for questions for this panel. Are there any questions? Delegate Nick Kipke from HGO.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Laura Jones, I forgot the gentleman's name, but people who support the bill stated that suicide numbers don't change. Could you speak directly to that as it relates to, I mean, you mentioned that suicide rates go up 6.3%, so you obviously have a differing opinion. Can you speak specific to that? Thank you.
Yes. Thank you. There was a study done by Jones and Patton, and it was a very conservative number. The 6.3% was very conservative because they were looking at the claim proponents have that the suicide rates go down when this law is passed. And so they wanted to determine, do suicide rates actually go down? And in the process, how they went about it, they set all the parameters of their study to determine that avenue. And that meant that they took out, they accounted for things like, do people have a hard time getting jobs? What other kind of suicide factors are in play? And they took all of those factors out. And then they looked at the study again, and they determined that even with everything out, and the people that are committing suicide by using the End of Life Option Act, that the suicide rates did not go down. They actually increased 6.3%. And as I said, that's the most conservative number out there, because all the others, a lot of the other studies will just look at the overall before and after number, and they won't account for all these other variabilities. Did I answer your question there? I think.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you.
Okay.
6.3%. And we do have Debbie Ryan now. Debbie Ryan, will you give us your testimony, please?
A lot of.
Miss Debbie Ryan.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, I just wanted to state that this is as a nurse of 32.
Give us your name, please, and you can start your testimony.
I'm sorry, Debbie Ryan. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
You can give us your testimony.
Oh, I apologize. I'm
It's
Debbie
okay, no
Ryan.
worries.
I've been a nurse for 32 years, and this this bill, physician-assisted suicide, is positively the antithesis of good nursing. Good nurses are the carers and those that are compassionate in the community and the most trusted of any profession in this country. I want to focus on something, and that is the depression associated with any request for suicide, be it physician-assisted suicide or regular suicide of somebody who's clinically depressed. In looking at the Oregon report, we see that many people report that lack of enjoyment in daily activities is among the highest reasons they're seeking assisted suicide. And when you couple that with the fact that they're seeking suicide, they would, on any depression inventory, qualify as depressed. And yet, the mental health professional that evaluates these individuals has a very low bar to establish mental capacity, not depression. And these individuals are denied depression medication. And we know from Kathleen Foley at Sloan Kettering Cancer Center that 95% of people will reverse their decision when their depression is treated. And there is very little depression treated in this case. They are not referred to depression treatment. And yet, as I said before, on just about any depression inventory, particularly Beck's depression inventory, they would qualify as depressed. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. One last time for Johnny Conway. Johnny Conway. All right, any questions for this witness? Seeing none, we're going to go to a favorable panel. We're going to start with Brandy Alexander, then Lorraine Rogers, Alexandra Frazier, Edna Hirsch, and Janet McCollum. Mr. Alexander, please unmute yourself.
Miss Alexander.
Oh, it's Miss Alexander, sorry.
No problem. Hi, good
Go ahead.
afternoon, everyone, to the members of the community and the chairs. My name is Brandy Alexander. I'm a resident of Prince George's County. For the past 20 years, I've worked to advance end-of-life care options around the country. And I ask you all yet again, how many more Marylanders have to die without this option? We sit here year after year debating opinions and statistics and facts, but this is about people, dying people that frankly deserve more from their leadership. The only fact that really matters is that Marylanders want this law. The most recent poll from Gonzalez showed that 72% of people in Maryland are support of this option, which is actually up from 66% in 2019. But yet and still, we continue to spend hours and now years actually pontificating while dying people are suffering. We all know that death is universal and one of the most personal and powerful times in our lives, and every single one of us should be able to decide on the care we want that is consistent with our values, priorities, and beliefs, and not yours. This is about dying people's options. The question is not how they'll die, not if they will die. So people who seek medical aid in dying want to live, but are stricken with life-ending illnesses. And if you don't support this option, then you don't have to use it. It's just that simple. But please stop trying to stand in the way of capable, terminally ill adults. And I know the former Delegate Pendergrass already read the entire testimony from the Honorable Elijah Cummings, but I do want to read a quick excerpt again where he spoke about having to watch people suffer. And he said, as I recall, those losses for you, I must acknowledge that my prayer for those dying loved ones deprived of any reasonable hope for a prolonged life was for a respectful and compassionate end of their suffering and a swift journey to that better place. And as a compassionate society, we cannot value the life in the abstract and deny those who are about to die self-determination. So thank you all for your time. Please vote yes on this bill.
Thank you for your time. Lorraine Rogers, will you be so kind and unmute yourself?
Good afternoon. My name is Lori Rogers. I'd like to address some concerns that have been raised by delegates who favor the bill but have some questions about particular details. Some have questioned whether oncologists and cardiologists are qualified to assess the mental capacity of patients. All healthcare providers are required by both law and medical ethics to obtain informed consent from patients before any procedure or treatment. And they routinely make such assessments and have both the experience and the expertise to do so. Hawaii is the only state to mandate mental health professional examinations, and a clinical psychologist there has reported that 161 of all of his assessments have been consistent with those of the attending and the consulting docs. He concludes that terminally ill patients should not be required to undergo a burdensome, potentially costly, time-consuming evaluation by a specialist unless the consulting or the attending feel there is a real need to do so. A second issue is the safe storage of lethal meds. The possibility of suicidal grandchildren accessing them has been raised. And in reality, suicidal grandchildren are going to be going in grandpa's closet to get his guns, not his medicine chest to get his meds. And while few are suicidal, many are unfortunately addicted, and they're searching the sick room for the opioids, for the morphine, the oxy. Another concern is doc shopping and whether patients will be looking for a doc to give them a favorable mental capacity evaluation. And I would say, aren't we all encouraged to seek second opinions when we are faced with something that is really serious? Virtually all patients, in fact, are going to have to doc shop to find a doc who is both willing and able to write such a prescription. Many docs work in hospitals, particularly to assist patients in this way. Some doctors aren't willing to do it for whatever religious reasons. Many are not opposed, but they don't have the time and they're not willing to do the research.
You have to wrap out your thought, ma'am. Can you wrap out your sentence?
Yeah, there are legal and medical research and reporting requirements that docs need to look into before they can write such a prescription. And that's very time consuming. And how do they get compensated for it? So they're not willing to go there.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Next, we have Alexandra Fraser. Will you be so kind and unmute yourself?
Yes, good day. I'm Alexandra Fraser, also known as Alexa. I'm here to provide favorable testimony for the medical aid in dying bill. I am an ordained minister. I've been engaged with this issue since 2015. I started focusing on it in response to my father ending his life with a gun as he refused the pain, suffering, and loss of autonomy his advancing Parkinson's was causing. I would not have chosen that end of life for him, but he spoke his autonomy through his actions. I've then returned over the years as first I was diagnosed with cancer, now thankfully in remission, and as friends and congregants approached me to talk about how, after being told they were eligible for hospice, they might end their lives legally and with the support of their doctors. I've been working for 10 years on this. I am a supporter of hospice. Please don't create a false dichotomy. You can do one, you can do the other, you can eventually do both if that's what you need. This bill does not undermine or prevent the use of hospice. Allegations to the contrary don't use the words hypotheticals or slippery slope, but that is in fact what they are alleging. I follow the dictates of my faith, which treasures bodily autonomy and personal agency. It grounds itself on the principles of free and responsible personal search for truth and the right to use conscience. We've heard over 70% of Marylanders support the principles of MAID. Is this democracy where surely the will of the people carries some sway? How can we continue to be calling this controversial and continue to deny the rights of autonomy and self-determination to our people? I've worked as a chaplain. I've been with people when they were under death sentence. They should have the choices that this bill affords them.
Thank you very much for your advocacy. Next, we have Ms. Edna Hirsch. Will you be so kind and unmute yourself and give us your testimony?
Am I unmute?
Yes, you are.
Great. My name is Dr. Edna Hirsch. In December, my husband died of glioblastoma. He suffered tremendously and he was in hospice. He hoped to use this end-of-life option. I've participated for the past 10 years trying to get this bill passed. It was a good bill to start with, but over the past 10 years, it has additions and more safeguards that it borders on the ridiculous. And over these years, I have heard so many people, it's just lies, that somehow this is suicide or disabled people will be vulnerable, the vulnerable will be able to use this. That is not what this is. However, it is true that in the state of Maryland, it is easier to end your life with a gun. And so that disingenuous dialogue needs to be addressed. Go on and Google how many people in the state of Maryland commit suicide for their terminal illnesses, and you will be shocked. And they shouldn't have to. This bill is a great bill. My husband suffered badly. My father suffered and would have loved to be able to take advantage of this. So if I sound angry, it's because we've worked for 10 years and it's usually some type of political pandering that doesn't let this bill see the daylight. Please, I beg you, let this get to the General Assembly. Let this get to the General Assembly, let it get out of committee, and let it get voted on. Please. Thank you.
Thank you, and I'm so sorry about your husband's passing.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Hirsch. Next, we have Janet McCollum. Will you be so kind and unmute yourself? Janet McCollum. All right, now I'm going to open it up for questions. Are there any questions from both the Health and Government Operations Committee or Judiciary? Seeing none. Oh, yes, Delegate Hill.
Thank you. I wanted to, first of all, thank everyone for being here and all the previous panels too. I wanted to ask Reverend Fraser a question. I've got data here from the CDC that shows that contrary to earlier testimony, the suicide rates in states that have enacted aid in dying do not rise faster than suicide rates and the national average. Would that be a surprise to you?
No,
that aid in dying does not actually increase the rate of suicides?
Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to respond to that point. As some of you know, I'm a second career minister and my first career was as a statistician. So a public health statistician. So I actually know and understand those data. It is my personal belief and understanding from looking at these data that the adjustments made in the study that somebody, I'm sorry, I can't remember, somebody on the unfavorable side cited as increasing were actually the incorrect adjustments, and that the adjustments that need to be made are for trend lines in suicide across time. So when you adjust for trend lines in suicide across time, where you get to is that this does not change the level of suicide when this bill is introduced or has been around for a long time. Somebody perhaps, anyway, one of us said something to the effect that there was just over 100, coming up on 150 years of data on this bill. There's no reason for hypotheticals anymore. Thank you.
Thank you. So are there no further questions? I am going to go now on to the last panel of the day, which is an unfavorable panel. We're going to start with Christina Borman, followed by Rabbi Ariel Sortwin, Shirley Reddock, Martha Schrer, and Jessica Rogers. And when we call you, please unmute yourself. First, Christina Borman, will you be so kind and give us your testimony? You each have 2 minutes.
I need to correct, I'm unfavorable, so I'm not sure how I got on your list as favorable.
This is an unfavorable panel that I'm calling, so you are correct.
Oh,
And my
okay, I'm
record is
sorry.
correct. It's
I
okay.
didn't hear you.
It's all right.
Honorable delegates, I've been a nurse in Maryland serving people for the past 50 years. And I believe the sponsors and supporters of this bill have created an illusion that taking your own life is a dignified way to die. It is not. On the contrary, it would forever change the doctor-patient relationship, which is rooted in the oath, do no harm. Any scenario given can be treated with palliative care, so dying is not something to fear. Do not force people to consider the value of their life, especially the weak, vulnerable, and those alone or depressed, as they are at greatest risk. You cannot control what the healthcare insurers will do either. In California, after their bill was passed, I believe I read that a young mother who had been treated with chemo for her cancer was denied the cancer after the bill was passed and told that she could in fact be given from her insurers the pills instead, but not the treatment. She died, leaving 3 young children. As a caregiver my entire adult life, and now at the age of 78, I fear becoming a care receiver, living in a state that has little value of life-affirming legislation, but rather focuses on promoting a culture of death. This legislation was rejected 7 times over as many years. Why is it back? Could it be our voices are never heard as voters? I vote. I would hope your political agendas would not supersede our messages, so please hear us this year. Personally, I have been blessed to care for both parents who died 3 years apart, one in my home. I also lived for 3 weeks with my dying sister who had Down syndrome and experienced the ultimate gift of comforting her. How wrong you would be to deprive anyone from those life-changing, exceptional experiences. As elected officials, your duty is to protect life, not enable the snuffing out of it. I urge you to reject these efforts to codify the killing of our fellow brothers and sisters. Thank you.
Thank you, and sorry about your losses. Next we have Rabbi Ariel Swalwin.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair of the Health Government Operations Committee, Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair of the Judiciary, and distinguished members of both committees. Thank you for the opportunity today. For the record, my name is Rabbi Ariel Sadler. I'm the Executive Director of Agudath Israel of Maryland, the Regional Office of Agudath Israel of America. Agudath Israel speaks on behalf of Orthodox Jewish communities across Maryland and across the country on matters of government affairs and public policy. For the last 90 years, our organization has been the voice for culturally sensitive health and end-of-life advocacy for American Orthodox Jewry. I wish to state our firm opposition to House Bill 1328. In your packet, you will find also written testimony from Yahalom, Maryland, which is a division of our organization, serves as points of contact for individuals, families within the community who seek assistance navigating issues related to physical, intellectual, and developmental disabilities. Yahalom stands in conjunction with the general consensus of the disability advocacy groups in opposition to this bill. I'm simply here to share the time-tested perspective of more than 2,000 years of classical Jewish tradition that all human life is sacred and at all times during the life cycle and without any exception. We must not accept the notion that we can place a value on life based on its quantity or its quality. Our lives are a sacred charge. They are gifts that we must use and appreciate. It's never in our own hands, but in the hands of God itself. Any law to go ahead and change that, to undermine that fact, is something that we oppose strongly. On behalf of Yahalom, the Organization of Disability Rights in our community, I wish to mention the name of a dear departed friend of mine and many of others who are watching on this hearing today, Cheryl Grossman of blessed memory. Cheryl was a fighter who had numerous ailments and disabilities throughout her life. She would come every year to testify in opposition to this bill on behalf of the disability rights groups. In her own words, she would testify that this bill buys into the age-old notion that a life without limitations is less worthy of life, unquote. Cheryl passed away 3 years ago, but her unbreakable spirit lives on. Together, we request an unfavorable report on House Bill 1328. Thank you very much.
you. Sorry about Cheryl's passing. Shirley Reda, will you please unmute yourself?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Good afternoon. I am Dr. Shirley Reddick, a pediatrician and pediatric hematologist oncologist. Thank you for hearing my testimony today. I ask you to vote unfavorable of this bill. As a physician, clinician, and medical educator, I have followed the history of this and similar legislation and know its danger to society. It clearly works against true health and safety promoting efforts of members of this assembly. All here must see that there is no recovery, so no healing from one's own physical death. This proposed legislation fuels a type of ethics that does not prioritize the intrinsic worth of each human being, but accepts wear-out dates and disposability of human life with clear economic benefits to that thinking. If the ultimate outcome of this act is to allow someone to be at peace with killing themselves in an efficient way without perceived legal consequences and with clear preservation of insurance death benefits, then I ask, why does this need to be another responsibility focused onto our healthcare system, and particularly the healthcare professionals who, as human beings, have the same existential vulnerability? This bill justifies secretive actions of the patient at their most vulnerable moments and also lying on a public health record. The death certificate. This bill flies in the face of promotion of truth and transparency in a government that appears to easily wash its hands of responsibility for this death-dealing act. With the loosening of requirements and expansion of telehealth practices, making no requirement for in-person visits, broader prescribing of classes of controlled substances, and ease of licensing requirements that facilitate wide-ranging interstate healthcare commerce, death is just a package delivery to your front door. This bill easily allows for the development of a healthcare side hustle of promoting, facilitating medical aid in dying. By the way, anyone can now buy the Medical Aid in Dying handbook on Amazon. The respected advancing frontiers of medicine are returning to an unruly Wild West. A lethal prescription is a loaded gun. Please oppose this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Ms. Martha Schreier. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Previously, I've shared 3 personal stories to illustrate why this law would actually make life harder for many whom it seeks to help and would increase the number of people who end their lives early. I've told you about how caring for my friend Dave with muscular dystrophy taught me life-changing lessons about love, patience, and sacrifice. How hearing about a former version of this bill increased my own fears of becoming a burden to my family because I'd been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. How my family is currently working to help our previously active and involved parents see value in their lives now that they no longer can do things that brought them joy and are experiencing great pain. Sometimes someone who is terminally ill or nearing death is highly vulnerable and should not be asked to balance the value of their own life against the burden they place on their families and caregivers. A mere comment about how much time it takes to help them or how much an inheritance would help with a grandchild's education could easily be enough to tip the balance toward an early death. I felt that, and the Oregon data supports my concern. I'll be happy to send that to you later. The final months of life are priceless opportunities for the dying and their families to connect with each other and find deep meaning. The conversations can't be focused solely on personal autonomy. Currently, Maryland law properly balances personal autonomy with the vulnerability that happens at the end of life. It allows patients to forego medical treatments or procedures that would prolong life. It allows medical professionals to treat pain so aggressively that it could hasten or increase the risk of death. It allows medical professionals to withhold and withdraw medical treatments in accordance with reasonable medical practice. My own moral beliefs are that mortal life is a precious gift from God. When dying becomes inevitable, it should be seen as a blessing and a purposeful part of eternal existence. Not feel obligated to extend life by extreme means, and those decisions are best made by that person and their families. However, deliberately ending the life of a person who is suffering from an incurable disease or other condition and assisting someone to die by suicide violates God's laws and is immoral. Please give HB 1328 an unfavorable report. Don't redefine a moral question.
Please wrap your
medical procedure. Thank you.
Thank you. Jessica Rogers, and thank you for sharing your stories, and sorry about your diagnosis and the loss of your friend. We're going to go to the last witness, Jessica Rogers.
Good afternoon. Thank you,
Afternoon.
Honorable. Good. Thank you to the honorable members of the committee. My name is Jessica Rogers, the Coalition's Director for the Patients' Rights Action Fund. As you consider public policy that impacts every citizen, data from other states makes it clear that the supposed safeguards are nothing more than smokescreens with no protection for vulnerable patients who need support in living. This is legal in Colorado, where young women with anorexia have been given drugs to end their life. By the testimony from proponents today that dying from malnourishment makes patients qualified, literally anyone can then access it. Similarly, in Oregon, diabetes has been a qualifying condition. And I wonder if the committee would be surprised that in almost 30 years in Oregon, 71% of patients do not ask for drugs because of pain or fear of future pain. Instead, it is for reasons of disability and not wanting to be a burden on others. I was the caregiver for my mother, who fought and ultimately died from ovarian cancer, outliving her prognosis by 3 years. And as a caregiver and a social worker, I can tell you that when someone says they feel like a burden, it has never been the correct answer to agree with them. The Oregon Health Authority also reports patients asking for drugs to end their life because they are concerned about the financial implications of treatment. In Oregon and California, there are well-documented instances of patients denied life-saving treatment by the same insurance companies that cover assisted suicide. There is no autonomy in a system that doesn't offer equitable health care. HB 1328 is a discriminatory policy that carves out some people, our most vulnerable friends and family, as being suitable for state-sanctioned suicide. And it means that when someone has an underlying condition, they receive a lower standard of care than an able-bodied, healthy person. That's why it's opposed by the American Medical Association and every major disability organization in the country. I ask you to stand with them and oppose HB 1328. Thank you very much.
Thank you for being with us today. I'm going to open it up now for questions for this panel. Look to the first page. Okay, I don't see any questions from either committee. I want to take a second to say thank you on behalf of both committees, whether you were favorable or unfavorable. I hope that you felt heard. It is not an easy topic, but we did listen and we were respectful. So I hope you have a blessed evening, and thank you, colleagues, for being here. Have a great evening.